A while back I made a video on my expressing some or describing some about my youthful experience as a young boy of first learning about the good news of Jesus and my accepting of that by faith, and then of course the unfolding of the rest of my life in relationship to that. Well, one gentleman responded to my video by criticizing this and by challenging me to provide some kind of basis for some type of scientific basis or empirical basis for my accepting the Christian faith. And he was pushing me or trying to push me to acknowledge or to admit that my youthful acceptance of Christian faith and my subsequent holding to that faith shows that I am closed-minded, and even worse, that I am dishonest by continuing to insist on believing something that I accepted as a child, that this somehow means that I am being dishonest and that I am not being fair in the evaluation of the evidence in support of that claim that I accepted as a child. And I thought that, and I've responded some to that particular video, but I thought that what I would do is offer a little bit of a description of the approach that I was taking to responding to him, and maybe also this will allow a little bit fuller understanding of what we mean by Christian faith and what justifies it or what grounds it. So the first point that I would make is, and this point I tried to emphasize to him, and I'm not sure if I was able to effectively get it across, but the first point that I would make is that in all human knowledge, even in scientific knowledge, there are certain presuppositions, there are certain things that we accept and that we use without being able to demonstrate them by going outside of them or by objectively looking at them from a distance or examining them. One of the most obvious of these, or one of the most helpful, I think, of these is our acceptance of sense experience and the data that comes through sense experience. I know about the world outside of me because I can see it and touch it and taste it and smell it and hear it. All of these senses give to me data about the world outside of me. With that information, my mind sort of goes to work and I start trying to understand the world about me. The whole scientific method and all the achievements of science are very much rooted in this sort of analysis and observation of the world, and then from that, scientists or theorists try to go back and discover what the foundations are underneath the empirical observable world. But everything begins with the observable world. For instance, if people came to the conclusion that all of our sense experience is deceptive, that in fact it is just a projection of the mind, and that we are really just in an elaborate dream state, and that nothing that we are dreaming about right now corresponds to any objective reality outside of our mind. If someone starts with that premise, or if someone accepts that starting point, it is impossible for us to get outside of the senses to verify their validity in response to this suggestion that our senses are nothing but a misinterpreted dream state. Try to do it. Try to step outside of your senses and prove that they are valid. What you will find yourself doing is continually reverting back to sense experience in order to try to prove sense experience. So for example, you might say, well, if you don't believe the world is there, just reach out and touch it, or just run into a wall, or just pinch yourself, or whatever, and recognize that it's real. But all of those experiences are using the senses in order to demonstrate them. There is no way to prove the reliability of the senses outside of the use of the senses. Now, I'm not suggesting for one moment that the senses aren't reliable. I trust them every day. I believe they're giving to me sound information about the world outside of me. But I cannot prove that by getting outside of the senses. The way we prove the senses is by using them. It's in the process of using them that they come to verify themselves or authenticate their trustworthiness. And then, of course, we have to recognize that sometimes they show themselves to be faulty, and sometimes they're misleading in various ways. But in general, we tend to trust our senses. And because of that, we're able to go on and develop science and other things. So science then, and that's not the only thing that science is based upon, but science is rooted in this basic trust that we have in certain givens, certain foundationally basic ideas or presuppositions or experiences or powers that we have as human beings. Now, what I suggested in the prior video that I made is that in the context of religious faith, for the Christian, belief in Jesus functions in that properly basic way. Religion focuses on, or theology focuses on certain questions that science is incapable of addressing and answering. For example, science can tell us about certain mechanisms or descriptions of the way in which the universe has evolved, let's say, or developed. But it can't answer the question of why is there anything at all? Or where did the universe ultimately come from? Where does energy come from ultimately? It can't explain what's good and evil for us as human beings, or whether human freedom means anything, or whether or not human history has a purpose. All of those are questions that lie beyond the range, especially of modern science, because it deliberately excludes questions of meaning or purpose or ultimacy in the sense of a reason for there being a material universe, or the reason why there's energy at all. Those are questions that reach beyond the powers or the capabilities of science. Now, if a person recognizes that and sees that to be true, the answer to those questions is one that must be drawn from. If a person's going to find answers to those questions, a person might say it's impossible to find an answer to them. But if a person is looking for answers to those questions, it's going to come through another path than through the path of the scientific method, let's say, because the scientific method can't address those questions. It rules them out. It brackets them out of consideration. So for the Christian, we find in Jesus and in the Judeo-Christian revelation, we find the divine answers given to us by God, we believe, to these ultimate questions. Where did everything come from? Where is it going? What's good and evil? How should I live my life? So the Christian faith provides the answers to those questions ultimately in and through the person of Jesus Christ and through his life and his sacrifice and his resurrection. We find the divine answers to those questions. Now, as a boy, I accepted Jesus as the key to those big questions in my life. As I have grown up, as I have matured, as I've continued to think and study, I found that that framework and that worldview that I embraced and that became most basic and fundamental to my experience, I found that that acceptance of Jesus and that revelation from God has continued to make my life coherent. It provides an ever deepening source of understanding of the mystery of life. It brings fulfillment to me. And in that sense, and like my acceptance of sense experience authenticates itself in the process of using it, so it is my Christian faith in the process of using it, in the process of living it out, in the process of working through its implications, applying it to the world of my experience. In the process of doing that, it has authenticated itself. It's shown itself to be true. Now, there are some misunderstandings that I've had along the way that I've thrown aside or corrected or developed or whatever. There are various things that I've come to sort of alter in some way or another. And so my understanding is not exactly what it was when I was 7 or 8 years old, of course. But even though there have been those adjustments and deepenings and developings of my faith, the fundamental basic commitment that I made to accepting and embracing Jesus and the faith that comes to us through the scriptures and so on, that fundamental commitment that I made has shown itself to be trustworthy, reliable, believable, compelling and fulfilling in my experience. And therefore I find no reason to abandon it, no more than I find any reason to abandon the basic trustworthiness that I have in my sense experience of the world, even though I can't get outside of it and test it. It's impossible for us to get outside of the world absolutely and altogether and make a judgment about where it means or where it came from or whatever. We're all part of the process of history, and therefore we must make a judgment within the context and flow of history about what it means. And I would conclude with this thought here about this, that all of us are pilgrims. We are journeying through this life, and we must make a judgment about what we mean. If what I've said so far in this presentation is true, really we are confronted with a question, a really basic question, of whether we will accept the world that we're given through the senses, and whether or not we will accept this revelation that comes from God through Christ. I could say yes to one and no to the other, I suppose. In that case, I would end up, if I just accept the first, by believing the world given to me through the senses and perhaps the scientific process that comes out of that, I will end up being an adherent to scientism or some type of materialism. But if I open myself to both to the reality of the sensory world and the scientific as well as the transcendent, the philosophical, and ultimately the theological that comes to us through Christ and God's revelation, what I would suggest is that the same type of successes that science can give you are also the kinds of successes, analogously similar successes, that one can have in response to the great questions of life. Where did we come from? Where are we going? What does life mean? And we can find that, I think, most supremely by looking to Jesus. And I found no reason to abandon that in the course of my life.